I was approached by a broker that was looking for practices to buy. He had several different, DSO organizations lined up that wanted to buy practices. And so I decided, I think it came down to timing. I sat one evening after getting one of those emails and talked to my husband, and I said, now is either the time to do it or we're not going to do it for another 10 years, because we were about to reinvest several $million into a new building and, all of that. And it was not going to be a great time to sell once you're several $1 million reinvested.
Welcome to Investment Grade Practices Podcast, where we believe private practice dentists deserve to get the lifestyle today while building an asset for tomorrow. Join your host, Victoria Peterson, to design the practice of your dreams and secure your financial independence. Let's get started.
I am here with the fabulous Dr. Nikki Green. And Nikki, you've been a PDA client. You're an advocate for dentists across the country. And I remember a few years ago at a PDA workshop, I said, I'm going to have a ladies' luncheon. And my team went, a ladies' luncheon? What do you mean? I was like, well, there's so many female dentists here. Yeah. I just want to get and I said, what is it like to be a female dentist? And I remember the look on your face. You're like, what does that have to do with anything? So you're a role model, male, female, dentist, entrepreneur, clinician. You are a role model on so many levels, and I'm super excited to have you here today.
Well, that is very generous of you to say that, but I do remember that ladies' luncheon, and I actually left that ladies' luncheon with a new shiro, and you were my new shiro. So I'm not kidding. Like, I left there when I learned so much about you, that you owned practices and you were, what all your affiliation with PDA, which I didn't even know it at the time, and how you and Bruce became partners. After I heard those stories, I remember going home and telling Bob that I had a new shiro. So you too are inspiring and a role model. So
thank you. I've never been called a shiro. All right. Well, let's share with our audience how savvy female dentists can be and what a savvy owner you are. We have recently rolled out a new tool that helps doctors understand the value of optimizing the practice. I think had you had this 5 years ago, you would have just eaten it up. And so I want to talk about that because you've been on this journey of peak and plateau and go to the next level. So talk to us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. Well, that's actually how I first got introduced to PDA. I was on a plateau that I was just having a hard time getting off of. And I had tried everything. I'd thrown every noodle of spaghetti against the wall. I had tried to bring in associates. I'd tried to bring in partners. I had tried new systems. I had tried multiple things, and nothing seemed to be able to get me off that plateau. So I heard you and Patty actually one day on a podcast. And I said, okay, I think PDA is the answer. And so I sought out PDA, took my team there for the first time. I wish I could remember years and dates, but I don't remember. I think it was 2016-ish, probably.
Yes.
That's probably when it was. And went down to San Antonio and met you guys, had that ladies' luncheon. And I have to say that immediately we began getting off that plateau. And I thought that's all I wanted. But by meeting you and meeting Bruce and meeting the others at PDA, I kind of, maybe at the time you hadn't coined the investment grade practices yet, but we talked about it. And that's kind of what I set my sights on that I wanted to do. I wanted to build a practice that either would self-manage, so it would manage itself and I could remain the owner of in perpetuity, and continue owning and operating and running this practice, or build an investment grade practice that I could potentially sell one day. And I really didn't know which direction I wanted to go, but I knew in order to be either of those things and be either of those things at a high level, I had to have a truly optimized practice. And that's not just from a productivity standpoint. That's a systems and team and culture. Culture's so huge, all of those things. So thank you to PDA because you guys put me on the track.
Well, you're welcome. So that our listeners have an idea of what plateau means to you, do you mind sharing what you were collecting at the time that you plateaued?
Yeah, I don't mind at all. I really think I was somewhere around the 2.5 million mark. So I had, when I bought the practice, I was pretty quickly $1 million practice. Of course, I bought it when it was doing 700,000 or 800,000. So it's not like I bought it, when it was, doing really poorly. And then immediately I was probably at the $1 million mark. And then I slowly, over probably the first 5 years of me owning my practice, just to give a little background there, I've now owned my practice. I'm in my 14th year, I believe, maybe 15th. And the first 5 years, I had just slowly grown to 2 million, 2.5 million. But I really wanted to be a $3 and $4 million practice with multiple providers. That's not just me doing all the production. That's multiple providers, multidiscipline in the sense that we could take care of 80+% of our patients' needs. We wouldn't have to do a lot of referring out. That's just the kind of practice that I wanted. So I was having a hard time coming off that 2.5 million mark. Didn't matter if I had 2 associates, if I had 1 associate, if I tried to bring in a partner, I tried so many different things and I just could not get off of that plateau. And really, I give the credit all the time. It came down to how I was scheduling. I was scheduling in a way that I was never going to get off that plateau. It didn't matter if I added more bigger procedures. It didn't matter what I was going to do. The way I was scheduling, I was never going to get off of it. So Bruce very eloquently taught me how to get off that plateau with how we schedule. So
all about scheduling to
haven't looked back.
Yeah. So then you grew. How quickly did you grow? What happened after that? Yeah,
so that's a great question. There were some bumps and bruises along the way. Let's not pretend like it was all super rapid growth. I immediately, I think, it went over that 3 million mark, sat at around that 3 million mark for several years. And honestly, that's about where I thought I kind of wanted to be. I really thought that that's just kind of where I would sit, until I went and learned more about productive scheduling and learned more about adding more productive procedures, did a better job of marketing. We brought better marketing on. So we were marketing for higher end procedures, cosmetic procedures, all on 4, all on 6 type procedures, full mouth rehab procedures. And then just immediately we began even getting off of that plateau of around the 3 to 3.5 million mark. I think in 2020, we did right at 4 million. And in 2021, we did 5 million. So we made
midst of a pandemic.
Yeah, we made some huge jumps in there with a lot of the PDA principles.
Wow, that's amazing. And, marketing, I'm glad you brought that up because I was looking at a recent survey. The average dentist markets, you'll love this, 0.5%.
Yeah.
It's less than 1%. And it's like having a race car and putting a gallon of gas in it.
Yeah, totally.
You're going to go very fast for a very short period of time.
Yeah. I mean, our marketing budget is easily 5%. So 5% of that 5 million last year, that's a hefty number, What is that, 250,000? If Bruce or Bob were here, they could do that math quicker than I can. But not to say that men do better math, just they're ones to pull that off the top of their heads.
But, 20 to 25,000 a month sounds crazy to some people. But when you look at PPO write-offs, if you were 5 million in PPO, you would have to produce 7 million.
100%.
Right. So,
I think the way I see that is I'll pay that to another small business marketing company all day, every day, than to pay that to MetLife or Delta Dental. Right.
Yes.
So all day.
Well said. Let's create more jobs.
Exactly.
So I remember your productivity went up, and I remember the phone call. I don't know if it was Brenda or one of our coaches calling and say, Nikki's really upset. Her productivity's up, but her profits are down. And I was like, okay, well, then it's time to work on the profits. 100%. How did you work on that part of the business?
Yeah, 100%. Because in the midst of growing productivity, we were growing team and we were growing, technology and all those things that we needed to grow. But I think at the end of one of those $3.5 million years, I looked at my profitability and I was doing better at 2, and similar. I mean, that might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I thought, wow, I finally got off this plateau and we're doing so much more, but my profitability is not reflecting how much growth that we had had. So that's when I kind of realized, I wish I'd have had that calculator you showed me at the beginning of this call, because maybe that calculator could have made that more clear from the beginning. But I guess I was just one of those that was on the treadmill that thought if I would do more, then the profitability would come. And it was kind of eye-opening when I looked at profitability and realized, okay, that wasn't there. So we started using your profitability incentive point, measurement, which is one that, that comes later in the coaching game. And that was one that that I hadn't really been taught, and not the coach's fault. I just wasn't there. And so they kind of taught us that part of the PDA tool. And I realized, okay, I've got to pay attention to this. So I've got to make sure, what percentage is going to my lab costs, what percent's going to my dental supply costs, what percent's going to my team cost, all of that. And we kind of started narrowing those percentages and getting those within the ballparks of what they were supposed to be. And once we did that, then there was profitability left over at the end. I do have to give a little credit. I know we've talked about this before with PDA, but I did read the book Profits First, which that is hugely helpful. So before PDA had a calculator, there was the book Profits, McAllowicks, Profits First, and that helped.
Barbara Stackhouse has now worked with Mike to bring it Profits First for Dentistry.
I've heard that.
Get that book. Barbara's terrific, and Profits First is fabulous philosophy.
And Profits First is not what you think it is. I actually, I was reluctant to read the book at first because I thought that it was going to be, egotistical or, too materialistic or something, but it's actually the opposite of that. I actually kind of say that it's the Dave Ramsey for business, Yeah.
I love it. So did you set up all your separate bank accounts?
Oh, yes. Did all that.
Nice.
Threw Bob on his ear because Bob, my husband, who maybe some of your listeners don't know, but he's my husband. He's the one who taught me how to run a dental business, had never done anything like that. So when I showed him all these different accounts that I was setting up, he thought I was crazy. But hey, it kept me from touching I'm a spender. And so it kept me from touching that money because I was really guilty about looking at the bank account and seeing how much money I had and thinking that meant, a new piece of technology that I really didn't need. So it helped me remain disciplined. I'm a big advocate.
I love that. Well, if you don't mind, I would love if we fast forwarded all the listeners from 2016 to 2021.
Sure.
You've transitioned your practice and your mindset once again. Where are you at today?
Well, I actually made a big change in 2021 and one that I did not think that I would do, honestly. So I really thought I had it in my head that I was building this optimized practice that I would continue to own, 10, 15 years down the road. Now, I did envision myself working less in it. I wanted to get the practice self-managing. I wanted to really work on building the team culture. But I really thought that I would continue to own it. We actually had a new building purchase. We were going to do a big remodel and move into a new building. And early in 2021, as many listeners on this call probably have had happen to them, I was approached by a broker that was looking for practices to buy. He had several different, DSO organizations lined up that wanted to buy practices. And so I decided, I think it came down to timing. I sat one evening after getting one of those emails and talked to my husband. And I said, now is either the time to do it or we're not going to do it for another 10 years because we were about to reinvest several $1 million into a new building and, all of that. And it was not going to be a great time to sell once you're several $1 million reinvested. Early in 2021, I'd paid most of my debt down. I was in a very low debt situation with a high value dental practice and one that really was managing itself. So I decided to look into selling, and I actually did. So in October of 2021, I actually sold to a silent DSO. I'll use their name. Independence Dental Corporation is who they are. I'm very happy with that sale. They really do leave me alone when I say silent. And I was very careful about who I chose. This about me, Victoria, but not only do I like doing dentistry, I really love running a dental practice. And so I didn't want to sell to a corporate that was going to come in and run my dental practice. I wanted one that recognized what we were doing and that it was a good thing and would leave me alone. And so far, we're 4 months into it and they're leaving me alone. We'll see. Call me back in 6 months. We'll see.
I love it. You mentioned a couple of things. You said, I had to think about the timing.
Right.
And you're right. We've got dentists that we're coaching right now. They're from 35 years old to 50 years old, and they're being approached. And It really, if you've got a 15 or 20 year window, that may be a different decision than if you're like, you sound like you were right on the precipice.
Sure. Yeah, it was, my life situation. I would say most dentists probably my age, this would not be perfect timing. I'm in my mid 40s. Most of us are just getting going in our careers and would want to continue owning. And I think truthfully, part of me still does. But as you know, I'm married to a dentist who's a little my elder. And we have spent the last 15 years of our lives living in 2 different cities. And so the time was now for us to stop living and working in two different cities. He owns and operates his dental practice in Abilene, Texas. I own and operate mine here in Fort Worth. And that meant the majority of our weeks were spent apart. So one of the transitions we're hoping to make with this, and we are making, we've already started making it, is we're going to spend more time together. So we'll still go back and forth. I still own and operate, or I still own 20%. Okay, I didn't say that part about my deal, but I own 20% of my Fort Worth practice. We'll still go back and forth. We'll both work in both practices, but we're going to do it together with a little less, maybe with a little less burden on our shoulders by not owning both practices in each location. So.
I love it. I always picture Bob in the limo, going back and forth between offices.
This is true. Don't imagine him back there like working though, because I think that's what he'd like to tell the IRS.
No, I imagine
back there working,
smoking a cigar and waving a flag and like revving it up on social media.
Yes, that or taking a nap. He's either smoking a cigar with a cocktail in his hand if it's the end of the day, or if it's the beginning of the day, he might be taking a nap. But he's doing work in that limo.
I love it. So do you think that by optimizing your practice first, did that financially make a difference or help with the timing of this decision?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, really the DSO market today, I know some of your listeners who listen into investment grade practices, you're looking to how can you optimally sell your practice maybe to a DSO. Sometimes when we get our practices to a certain level, it's very difficult to think about selling that to an individual person. So maybe our only option or one of our only options might be a DSO. And they're looking for EBITDA. They're not looking at last year's production and collection numbers. They're looking for EBITDA, which EBITDA is your profitability at the end of the year. So yeah, in order to get the capitalize in the way you would like to, then you need to have a decent EBITDA on those numbers. So absolutely, had I not optimized, had I not realized in somewhere around 2018, probably that, I was doing more dentistry, but I wasn't optimizing my profitability, then my EBITDA wouldn't be where it was and I wouldn't have gotten the value out of my practice.
Yeah, I think you're such a great illustration of that, I see doctors all the time. It's like, well, I grew, but they didn't grow the bottom line. Right. And for you, that was millions of dollars in the difference of that.
For
so
sure.
I'm 3.5 million. Let's sell. I should get 3.5 million, but you don't.
Yeah, that's not the way that works, right? Well, and in today's market, it's actually, that's what's so crazy about selling to DSOs in today's market is you're actually getting more than last year's collections. You're getting this multiple of your EBITDA if your EBITDA is high enough, to get that multiple and end up being more than last year's collections. But it all comes down to the math. It's not. There's nothing hidden in there. It's, do you have the EBITDA? Then you're going to get that, maybe 5 or 6 multiple of that EBITDA, or you're going to sell in the traditional way, which is going to be maybe 85% of last year's collection. So
I love it. So if there's anybody out there listening today that is stuck or plateaued or something like that, what kind of encouragement would you give them based on your journey?
Well, first of all, if you're not a PDA client, I don't know how many times I can say that. I actually think I say it on every podcast, even when I'm not on your podcast. So become a PDA client, because I have not had exposure. There's great consultants out there, and I've had some great ones. Gary Takis was a wonderful consultant. I've had great consultants, but I haven't had one like PDA that really shows me exactly how to do it. There is a cookbook for how you make this work. So if you're just starting on the journey of trying to optimize your practice, I would say do that. For what I'm really hoping the listeners is maybe some PDA clients who were kind of in that phase 2 spot that I was in, where they have taken a lot of the PDA principles, they've applied them in their practices. They're scheduling, more correctly. Their productivity is going higher, but now they're wondering, okay, what do I plan on doing with this thing I have created? And it's a beautiful thing that you've created, but what are we going to do with it now? And your calculator is awesome. I think if I'd have had that maybe 3 years ago, I would have maybe been a little more intentional about my path. Maybe it wouldn't have snuck up on me in 2021 like it did, which turned out to be a great decision, but maybe I would have been intentional about that, over the last few years. So yeah, I would say get that calculator, listen to your podcast. tap into what the DSO people are saying. I know DSO is I don't like the word either. I'd like to describe it a different way. But there's some good people out there in that world, and there's some really smart people in that world, and there's people in that world who really know the way businesses interact with each other. And that's just something in dentistry we've been outside of and maybe it's been good. Maybe it was good. Maybe the good old days were better when we were outside of that world and we didn't have to deal in that private equity world and things, but times have changed. And so tap into what they're saying, listen to some of those podcasts just to kind of have a feel for what's out there.
I think you bring up a great point that education is the great equalizer. And so dig deep and do your research. Nikki, you will be the first on my list. My new book, Investment Grade Practices, will be previewing to a limited number of people this spring, probably in about 3 months. And I would love it if you'd be a reviewer for me.
Yes, I would love it.
Oh, perfect. Well, we'll get you a copy of that. And we talk about that. It's having an investment grade practice gives you choices.
Yeah.
And so I know that you and I could have been on this podcast where you said, man, it was just the greatest choice. I brought an associate and this is the one. And we went to the bank and she bought in and then
100%.
And we got a plan. I wish I could see you, how confident you are. Like I had 2 or 3 options in front of me.
Right.
And I had the freedom to sit down and make an educated choice.
Absolutely. And I think that is the key of building an investment grade practice, because then you have a choice. Or if the worst could happen, which we all know stories of the worst happening, right? A dentist no longer can do what the dentist has always done. Then your family has options. I mean, that was the goal, was just to give myself more options. So
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being with us here today, Nikki. It was an absolute joy.
Well, thank you, Victoria. I always enjoy chatting with you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Investment Grade Practices Podcast. If you find value in this episode, help us spread the word by passing it along to a dental friend, subscribe, and give us a like on iTunes or Spotify. Learn more about building your investment grade practice at productivedentist.com today.